Welcome to the Whole Health Podcast, where we discuss science-backed information to help you optimize your health. For those who are new, I'm Jonathan Jarecki, and I'm a pre-med undergrad student passionate about health optimization and preventative medicine. On this episode, I had the privilege of speaking with Dr. Jack Kruse. Dr. Kruse is a renowned neurosurgeon with a deep passion for quantum biology and an expertise in light, water, and magnetism. Over the years, he shared his groundbreaking insights on countless podcasts, exploring the science behind his discoveries and providing practical steps for achieving optimal health. While his science-focused discussions are widely available elsewhere, this episode takes a different approach. We dive into personal stories, unique events, and perspective Jack hasn't extensively covered before. For those who want to explore the fascinating science further, I've included links in the show notes to some must-listen podcast episodes featuring Jack. In our conversation, Jack takes us on a journey through his life, from his childhood to his professional evolution. We also discuss a memorable moment when I asked Dr. Andrew Huberman about Jack in front of a massive audience, and Jack shares his perspective on it. Additionally, we tackle some pressing questions I've had about light, water, and magnetism, highlighting experts that I have researched like Arturo Herrera, Gerald Pollack, and William Philpott. To wrap things up, Jack answers questions submitted by my Instagram audience. This episode offers a wealth of valuable insights and thought-provoking discussions that I'm sure will inspire you and bring you curiosity to deepen your understanding. Now, Dr. Jack Kruse.
Where we really start this story is my mother had a miscarriage the year before I was born. And then she prayed to St. Jude to have a baby. And what are the things that she changed this time that she didn't do last time? She sat outside at 72nd and 5th Avenue in Central Park on a park bench, whether it was cold or hot, and she ate one tin of a can of, I think it was bumblebee salmon in a can. Don't ask me why she did this, but she actually must have known something. She was tapping something. But she sat outside, and I did ask her, because I saw a lot of pictures before I was born. She had these ugly-looking 1940 sunglasses. And I said, "Did you wear the sunglasses?" And she goes, "No, I didn't." She goes, "But I sat outside." And then later, when I guess I was like 7, 8, 9 years old, she used to have these, I guess you would call it family albums. And I don't know where they are anymore. I mean, they may be lost. But I saw the pictures of her sitting on the park bench, right there, because we lived on Lexington Avenue at that time, when I was a little kid. And that's how the story began. Then when I was really little, I think 2 years old, 3 years old, she put me in St. Ignatius Catholic school to teach me stuff. And the nuns told her, they said, "This kid is way ahead of everybody else. He knows how to do numbers. He knows his alphabet." She goes, "And he's too disruptive." And they actually made me leave their little, preschool program. And then it goes to 3rd grade when my teacher, this time we had moved already to Queens, New York from Manhattan. And then my teacher, Miss Shanahan, called my mother in for a parent-teacher conference. And my mother looked at me and she goes, "What did you do?" I'm like, "I didn't do anything. I don't know why she's asking you to come in." And she goes, "Well, I looked at your grades. Your grades are good." She goes, "Have you been doing, I said, "Look, I don't know what's going on." But my mother made me come to this thing because she was pissed at me. Yeah. She was being summoned to school. And then when I walked in, Miss Shanahan was surprised to see me. And she told me to go sit in the front of the class, and teacher's desk was in the back of the class. My mother sat down there. Miss Shanahan was a Jewish lady with a big mouth, like, total fish woman. Yeah. And she said, "Mrs. Kruse, do you know what you have?" That was the first question out of her mouth. My mother was kind of taken aback. She goes, "What are you talking about?" She goes, "I have 4 children. All of them are doctors." And she says, "That kid is smarter than all of them."
Amazing.
Goes, "Do you know what you have?" So then the whole thing went through, and my mother's like, "So you brought me up here?" She goes, "Yeah." She goes, "I'm just going to tell you, he's disruptive to everybody, not because he's a bad kid. It's because he's too smart. He knows things that the other kids don't know. And she goes, they listen to him more than they listen to me. She goes, I'm going to make a recommendation to you. She goes, I think he needs to skip a couple of grades. And my mother was like really concerned about that. So she actually listened to Miss Shanazi. I wound up skipping 2 grades when I was younger. So that put me in college when I was 15 and a half years old.
Whoa.
And then the next big thing happens. I guess I was probably, I don't remember how old I was, maybe 14 or 15. And I told you nobody in my family really did anything academically. My grandfather, who was really kind of like my father, he gets diagnosed with oral melanoma by an oral surgeon. And, you know, he tells me kind of what the deal is. And I spent a lot of time, you know, with my grandfather, like in that office and, you know, talking to him. And then the doctor, his name was Dr. Deutsch, he would come and tell me, look, if you want to come and talk about all this and this and that. And he also knew I was pretty smart. And when my grandfather went to Columbia Presbyterian in New York for treatment, I got invited to go. And the doctors basically told him that there was nothing they can do because the melanoma was spreading like in his esophagus and things like that. And then I piped up. I said, well, look, here's some papers that show that you can actually go and take somebody's small intestine out, reverse it, and redo and make a new esophagus. It's not for melanoma, but it's for other things. And the guy looks at me, the surgeon, the thoracic surgeon, and he goes, who are you? And I said, I'm his grandson. And he goes, you did this work yourself? I said, yeah. I said, why don't you know about it? And that kind of set the tone. And then, you know, of course, he didn't get the treatment that, you know, I showed the doctor. As you can imagine, my grandfather died. And that is kind of where I got the gene that I don't care how smart you are, you're not smart enough if you're not willing to go under rocks that other people are not interested in.
Yeah.
And then Dr. Deutsch, because my grandfather was dead, and he was like the guy that helped the whole family through the process. And he says, Jack, you know, there's double degree programs that are brand new. He goes, when I went through dentistry and oral surgery, they didn't have these. You just had to either get a DDS or a DMD, which are equivalent degrees. He said, but there's 4 programs right now, brand new. They haven't even graduated their first class yet, where you can go and get both degrees at the same time. And he goes, they're really difficult to get into. And I remember, I always try to remember the other ones. It was Harvard, University of Connecticut, and Columbia. And there was another one, but I forget where it was. And I applied only to those 4. You know, he helped me, wrote me a letter of recommendation. Believe it or not, the doctor that actually operated on my grandfather also wrote, because he told me I should go to Columbia because that's where he was. And he actually told the story about my grandfather with the papers I brought in, and he was very impressed by that. And then I had another guy that's interesting in this story, a guy named Theodore Silbert, who taught me everything about fractional reserve banking. He wrote me a letter of recommendation. And another guy named Frank Scharf, who is an attorney who did some nice things for my family at this time when my grandfather died. And long story short, I get into all 4. I wind up going to the University of Connecticut School of Dental Medicine. I enroll in there. I roll in, and the first day we're in this big, huge classroom, and all the medical and dental students are together, and we have a person from the school come out and says, by the way, you'll all be taking the same classes, exactly the same for the next 2 years. So integrate and talk to each other, you know. And I was kind of a rebel even then, because I was an athlete before I went to school, and I had long curly hair.
What sport did you play?
Football and baseball.
Okay.
And I had this thing where I saw all these kids from Harvard and Yale, you know, driving around in Mercedes, and here I am, a poor kid from New York, and I'm going, these people clearly are not my crowd, but I'm gonna get them eventually. So
Yeah.
I made friends with a lot of the medical and dental students. In the first class, the way it worked, it was SBS and biochemistry. You only took 2 classes at the same time because um, when they had a really difficult class, they usually put some social bullshit, next to it. So SBS was social bullshit. The biochemistry class, they told us day one that this was the hardest class that we would have in the first year besides anatomy. And that the thing that made it hard wasn't the material, it was actually the pace. Like we were going to learn everything in like an 8-week period of time that you had to know about biochemistry. And they handed out a syllabus and this and that. So I'm sitting in the back of the room and they have this note-taking service and all that jazz. I don't take any notes. I sit there and just listen. And the guy that introduces the class, he's the one memorable guy from medical and dental school I'll never forget. Peter Setlow, PhD in biochemistry. He gets up there and the first day he goes, I have to teach you certain things like about cholesterol that I don't believe, but I have to teach it to you. So you're going to learn it. But he warned us, he goes, you should question everything that you hear in this class. And that made a huge impression on me that a guy before he starts teaching us said that. And he was kind of a hippie dude. He was like man buns before man buns. He had the goatee. And he was a typical New England guy that looked like he smoked weed on the weekends and drank beer. But he was a really good teacher. And I really appreciated kind of how he handled us. So the test comes out, and the way we used to do tests, they would post the scores outside the labs that we had on the second floor.
Oh, wow.
And one of my friends who I made friends with, his name was John Sorrentino. We called him the Queef for short, for a pretty cool reason. He calls me up, he goes, look, the grades are out for SBS and biochemistry. He goes, and he tells me what he got. And I'm like, bro, he goes, well, give me your social security number and I'll tell you, because they posted our grades. So I made the stupid mistake of giving him my social security number. And he goes, bro, you got like a 96 on biochemistry. And I think I got like a 97 or a 98 in SBS. So why was this a big deal? Because Sorrentino's there with all the medical students. I got the highest grade in the class out of the medical and dental students. And
Wow.
I smoked the dental students, but I really smoked the medical students. I think the next highest grade was a 73. And this place had a reputation of being the hardest class the first year. And I famously said to people, I said, well, if that's the hardest class, this is going to be a cakewalk.
Yeah.
And it turned out it was. And because Sorrentino had my social security number, he would announce my grades to everybody. I never went to look at the grades ever because he would just call me and tell me what I got. And that's how it went for the 2 years that I was there.
Yeah.
And then you start dental school, you do 2 years of dental school. When I interviewed in dental school, the guy that interviewed me, his name is Cornelius Pommier. He was a prosthodontist, crown and bridge. And the first question he asked me, he goes, Jack, why do you want to be a dentist? I said, I don't want to be a dentist. I want to be an oral surgeon. And he starts laughing at me. He goes, you know that everybody comes in here and says they want to be an oral surgeon or orthodontist. And I said, yeah, but I'm not everybody. I said, this is what I came to do. And then I told him a story about my grandfather. And he goes, okay. He goes, I guess we'll see how this goes. And he goes, do you think this was a good way to interview and this and that? I said, look, you're going to learn something about me. I am very direct. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. And then you're going to watch me do it. And I said, you have a choice. You're either going to accept me here or I'm going to go to Harvard and I'm going to go to Columbia and you're going to be sorry that I didn't do it. And the reason why this story resonated with me, not when it happened that first time, that's when the people in New England got a flavor for the kid from New York. And he told this story at my graduation to the people. And I didn't go to my graduation. I was the one, I always told my mother, I'll go to the last graduation. And the last graduation obviously happens, later down the pike, which is at LSU. And when I go to dental school, Pommier in that interview tells me, most of the people that come through here, because you have to go the first 2 years of medical school, with the dental school, you can't finish your requirements in 3 or 4 years. And I looked at him, I'm like, well, not only am I going to finish the requirements, but I'm probably going to finish them early. I'm going to spend my whole 4th year at an oral surgery program learning what I really want to learn. And he just looks at me, falls back in the chair. He goes, okay. So long story short, I finished dental school in 3 years. Everything I told Pommier happens. The 4th year, I find out what's the best program in oral surgery at that time. It's Parkland, Texas, and LSU. So I go down and I apply to the internship for my last year. And I'm like, look, I'm finished basically with dental school. I don't need to stick around. I'd like to come down there. I went to the oral surgeons at the University of Connecticut, a guy named James Hupp. Heard the story. He goes, yeah. He goes, I've heard about you. He goes, you don't want to do oral surgery here? I said, no, I'm done with you guys. I want to go to the best. And he looked at me like I was crazy when I said it to him. He goes, do you know how hard it is to get in? And I'm like, yeah, I know how hard it is to get in, but I'm getting in. And I went down to LSU, met a guy named Dale Missick. Dale Missick, turns out, played in the Little League World Series in Connecticut. So he had a big tie to Connecticut. And that's why he decided to take me into, the wings, because of this Connecticut link. He grew up there. And when I came down, I must have made a huge impact on him, because back in those days, this is when the match first came out. This is how doctors, rank programs they want to go to, and then the programs rank you. It's kind of like a free agency list about who you want. And he told me, well, we're not allowed to tell people. I said, I know, but I'm telling you, I'm ranking you number 1, and that's that, And I spent the whole year with these guys, and the oral surgery residents told Missick, they said, dude, this kid is smart. Like, he's smarter than us. And we've been down here 4 and 5 years already. And like he just masters everything we do. And they actually let me do things that I shouldn't have been doing. Because, technically I didn't even have a degree yet.
Yeah.
But, I got to wire jaws. I got to put plates and screws on Lefort fractures. I even got to help the neurosurgeons, because it turns out the oral surgeons at LSU, this is something I didn't learn. They spend 4 months of their first year in oral surgery in neurosurgery, acting as the second year resident in neurosurgery, because the neurosurgery service is so busy. So in the year that I was down there, I got to see a ton of neurosurgery, and I got to participate. And then I got to also cross-infect the neurosurgeons with me, and things like that. And believe it or not, the thing that I impacted on them, I took what we were doing on fractures in the face with screws and rods and said to these guys, I said, why do you guys keep wiring the skull back in? Why don't you use these new craniofacial plates and just screw it in? When I showed them how to do it one day, they're like, dude, this is really fast. It saves us a lot of time. And the bone flap doesn't, go in and out. So it turned out here I am as a 4th year dental student, and I'm making waves in the kiddie pool. And Missick takes me in to LSU. I get in, I get down there. And when I'm down there, that's when you have to do your first 6 months of oral surgery. And then you have to join the 3rd year medical class. You join LSU's class already in progress, but to make the grade, you have to take a test that all medical students take. I think it's called, I forget the name of the test. It's a 3-part test. I think it's the NERBS part 1, 2, and 3, or it's some kind of medical standardized test.
Yeah.
So the rule for us, since we were the 4 dentists, and of course all the people in LSU thought we were dumbasses, we came in and took the test, and I think 3 out of 4 of us were at the top of the heap when we tested.
Wow.
I think I got a 93 on that test, and that was the highest of anybody at LSU. Amazing. So when we come into the class, remember, we had already done like a year of residency, so we had a lot of experience, and the medical students didn't know who we were. They were like, who the fuck are these guys? And when we come in, we immediately go and work in our 3rd and 4th year, because you're doing clinical rotations. And the 3rd and 4th year of medical school are a joke. Really the first 2 years are the most important. But what you're getting to do there, that's when you go to the different specialties. You see like what urology does, you see what neurosurgery does, you see what neurology, gastroenterology, pediatrics, OBGYN, all of them. So for us, since we already had clinical experience, this was a cakewalk. And it got to the point where the LSU medical students really didn't like us because we were getting preferential treatment from the residents because the residents didn't treat us like medical students. They're like, these guys have already been residents. We can give them shit to do. Like we could put central lines in, we could intubate people. And it was a great situation for us. I mean, and I have to be honest, we were assholes about it because we felt like we were the king and we had a lot of free time and we didn't really hang out with the medical students. We hung out with the residents. So when I finished medical school, I go and start my oral surgery time. And remember, I told you that first 4 months, I got picked first to go into neurosurgery.
Yeah.
Well, I'm in neurosurgery the first 4 months from July through whatever it was. And it turns out the guy that LSU had matched in neurosurgery was a Mormon from Utah in New Orleans, which this is like, if you know anything about New Orleans is like fucking a third world country in the United States. And it's crazy. You know what Bourbon Street is? Well, this guy figured out within a month and a half of being down here, he goes, this is, heathen territory. It's Sodom and Gomorrah. There's no way that I'm staying here. So believe it or not, he picks up and quits. He doesn't even quit when he's in neurosurgery. He quits during the general surgery year to go back to Utah and do something else. So what this does, it creates a huge hole, not even for general surgery, but it created a huge hole for neurosurgery because that means the following July, they had no resident. Mm-hmm. So the guy who ran LSU neurosurgery, who's a neurosurgery legend, is named David Klein. He's talking with his chief resident. His chief resident is the guy that I'm working with. By this time, I'm just about done with my neurosurgery training with them. And it's like Christmas break. And Dr. Klein gets a phone call from, I think it was Al Gore, because Klein was big into the DNC at that time. And there's an Olympic swimmer that apparently got a brachial plexus injury, and they wanted to send this guy down to Klein to have surgery. And at the same time, Klein was fixing some guy from the Bosnia War. And it turns out that all the residents are, going home for Christmas and this and that. And Klein needs another pair of hands with these two. And he says to me, he goes, would you think about staying, over Christmas break to do these cases with me? And he goes, I promise you, it'll just be me and you. You'll do a lot. And I'm like, fuck yeah, I'm all in.
Yeah.
So I don't go home for Christmas. I stay and I do these cases. And the funniest part of the story, we're doing, I think it was the Bosnia guy. We did a complete brachial plexus reconstruction. I take all the nerve grafts out of the leg. And you have to remember, I'm a first year resident.
Yeah.
And Klein says to me, come up here. He goes, I want you to sew in the upper trunk and do this. And the anesthesiologist is a guy named Don Harmon. He's looking and he doesn't say anything, but you could tell he's looking at me. He pulls his glasses down and he sees me working. And then Klein takes his gloves off, throws his stuff down. He goes, look, 60 Minutes is here to interview me about this case. I'm going to go out and do this interview. And Harmon looks at him. He goes, well, who's going to finish the case? He goes, oh, Jack's got it. He's done this with us many, many times. He knows what's going on.
Wow.
So literally he leaves and I sew in the whole plexus and I close up the legs because, Klein's out there for 2 hours. And Harmon is looking at me, goes, dude, he goes, I have never in my medical career ever seen a private patient, especially a famous one, that they're going to let a first year resident, do this on. I'm like, bro, you could teach a monkey how to sew nerves in. It's not a big deal. It's not like we're doing spine surgery or brain surgery. I mean, peripheral nerve surgery is not technically difficult to do. It's just, you have to be accurate with your needle placement and the 7.0 and 9.0 Prolene sutures. So I get it done, come out and tell Klein, and he appreciates it. I get to meet the guys from 60 Minutes and all that jazz. And the next day, I think it was Monday, we have to do M&M conference. M&M conference is morbidity and mortality. This is when the chief resident has to go and get all the arrows from the staff of all the things that they thought he fucked up on or cases that he could have done differently. Mm-hmm. And I'm walking in with Tom to meet Klein, and then Klein's chit-chatting with Donner about how the cases went at Ochsner for his private patients. and I'm holding all the x-rays for M&M. And that's when the topic of the Mormon kid comes up. And Tom says, well, boss, what are you going to do? Because we used to call Klein boss. And he goes, well, we're probably just going to offer to somebody we didn't match last year and fill the hole and we'll be done with it. And Donner says to him, he goes, well, why are you going to do that? And he goes, well, you got a better idea? He goes, yeah. He goes, we already know Jack. He's great. Let's give it to him. Klein looks at me. He goes, son, you want to sign up for 7 more years of residency? And I'm like, I said, I think you're going to have to talk to Dr. Kent. Dr. Kent and Dr. Missick are my bosses in oral surgery.
Okay.
He goes, all right, let me do that. He goes, after M&M conference, he goes, I'll give them a call and we'll talk. So then Kent calls me up the next day. He goes, do you know what's going on? I'm like, Dr. Klein is trying to harvest me from you to go over there. He goes, do you know how prestigious it is to go to from the top of the dental program to the top of the medical program? And he goes, you're being hand selected by Klein? And he actually encouraged me to do it. So Dr. Kent is a little bit like Miss Shanazi, the way I look at it. Mm-hmm. And that's how neurosurgery happens for me. And in neurosurgery, my guy who is my chief resident, this is after Donner, a guy named Daniel Kim, he had the record for doing the most cases at LSU. It was like 500, I think, and 25 in a year. And when I was a chief resident, Klein, the first day you become the resident, Klein usually let us start our chief year 1 month early because he gave us the last month off because he thought it was important for people to decompress after getting your ass kicked for 6 years. And I started on June 1st. And on June 1st, I always heard the story from all the other chief residents that Klein would sit you down and he would tell you exactly what he expected from you. Like this was like your marching orders for the year. And Klein said to me, first thing, he goes, I want you to beat Daniel's record. He goes, I think you have the ability to do it. And he goes, but I want you to do it with hardly any mishaps. Mm-hmm. And he says, I want you to be as aggressive as you can be. And he goes, I'll have your back. He goes, I won't hang you out to dry. He was basically telling me that I'm not going to get fired. That was the worst thing in the world he could have told me because then I became truly Alpha Jack. Like I was a machine in my chief year. The last case I did, which was on May 31st, I'll still never forget it. I had already broken Daniel's record by this way. And my current nurse, Chantel, was in the room when I did this. I did a posterior communicating artery aneurysm. The first case, I think it was a cervical fusion. I knocked the cervical fusion out in about 35 minutes. And then we did the PCOM aneurysm. And my goal was to finish the aneurysm case before noon because I had told all the nurses in the hospital that I was going to run out of Charity Hospital naked and go straight to a bar across the street after my residency was finished. So I finished clipping this PCOM aneurysm with one of my staff guys named Deepak Awasthi. And when I put the clip on, I was done. And, we usually close the case up. And that's when Deepak said to me, he goes, no, go. He goes, go with because he knew what I was going to do. Yeah. Of course, everybody in the hospital runs outside when they know what's coming. And the residents close the case. And I take my scrubs off and run right out of the hospital naked, straight to the Joe's Bar, which unfortunately is not there anymore. I got taken out by Katrina. But that was an epic way to finish my resident. That's kind of how it goes down. And, for that time, I did get hammered that day. And I remember the next day, my first day off in about 13 years, I slept for 18 hours. When I tell you the circadian mismatch of my training was ridiculous. I mean, because I did 2 high-powered residencies, and literally my chief year, I was on call for trauma call at the busiest trauma hospital in the United States every other night. Like when I tell you we didn't sleep, we didn't sleep. And that's what started me down the path of my own medical problems, because at this time I really didn't have any. But then subsequently over the next, I guess you would say, 5-6 years, things started changing for me. And that's when I had my come to Jesus moment when I was in Birmingham, Alabama, talking to the neurosurgeons and orthopedic surgeons about these new instruments that I made. for minimally invasive spine surgery, and I tore my knee meniscus by standing up. And I think most people have probably heard that story other places.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is what sets me up with the lady from the biotechnology company, who's one of the orthos, I guess you would call her wives. She sends me the monk who sold his Ferrari in 6 papers about different things, but all related to leptin and melanin, and the rest is history.
Yeah. Awesome. That story is amazing. I bet your parents, your mom was extremely proud of you for not having no one in your family going to college and then doing what you did.
She was listening because I didn't go to any graduation until the last one, which was medical school.
Why did you not go to the graduations?
I went to any graduation except that one.
What was your reason for that?
Because I'm not done. I wasn't done.
You weren't done. Yeah. Yeah. You still had more. Yeah. Awesome. I want to unpack that a little bit. There's a lot to go there. And this is a question that I was really curious about. You said you went to a Christian Catholic school when you were a kid. And I know
I went to public school in New York, but my mother enrolled me in St. Sebastian aftercare, post-school stuff.
Oh, okay.
And that's where the nuns got me again after they threw me out of preschool. So I was in preschool in St. Ignatius in Manhattan. Then we moved to Queens. Then I went to St. Sebastian's religious school, and the nuns got me back. And they thought at that time when I was in 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th grade, they were going to beat me into shape. And they even made me an altar boy. And it turned out it didn't go as they had planned. I became the biggest lightning rod. Why? Because everything they taught us, I pushed against. And I pushed against it because of the things that I learned in the Museum of Natural History.
Interesting. So, okay, so you're at this, but you were brought up in the Christian faith, would you say?
Catholic. I was Roman Catholic.
Yeah. And so how is that shaped your views now? Are you, I believe you're...
Caused me to question everything.
Question everything, yeah.
Yeah, when I was a little kid, my mom told me, right here, we can't eat meat on fries. I'm like, that's bullshit. I want to know why.
Yeah.
I mean, just give me an example. That was one that really stuck in my ass. And then, the whole thing about communion and confirmation and drinking wine in church, I'm going, there's just something not right about a lot of this. You telling me that it's 6,000 years old and there's T-Rexes in 81st and 5th Avenue that are 65 million years old. I'm like, I'm just not buying this.
Yeah. Yeah. What about just the idea of there being a God? Perhaps not the Christian God, not the Catholic God, but what about a God?
Me like you think. It didn't really affect me because I thought the whole story that I was being sold was a sham. And when I was really young, I got very interested in the theory of evolution. And then I think the God thing, the thing that caught me, it wasn't the training of my mom or the nuns. I watched a movie about Jesus in Nazareth. It was like some big freaking movie at a time. And the scene when they crucified him was pretty graphic. That's what kind of caught me. I'm going, I need to learn a little bit about that. That was happening at the same time that I was learning about fractional reserve banking from Theodore Silbert, the guy I told you.
Yeah.
And those two things actually linked together. I started to realize the story about Catholics and the Jews is a really, really long one. And it's how shall we say, a bumpy road. And when I eventually went to college, which was the largest Jesuit university, I was a problem for them because I started going after the Jesuits pretty hard. I started to realize that the Jesuits and the Jews have a lot in common, and it's not a good thing. And they were using what they're known for to control people, meaning centralize civilization of groups of people. And if you would have asked me at that time, I don't think I could have put it that succinctly, but that's what was going through my mind. And what happened, it created somebody who was, to this very day, I tell people this, I am the most curious person you're ever going to meet. Why? Because this started early for me. I question everything. I don't take anything with a grain of salt. You can tell me something, I can respect you, and I'm still going to do my own due diligence. And when I figure it out, that's what I believe. And then at the end of every year, from about, I guess it's September 30th to December 15th, I have a notebook and I write all the things down I currently believe, and then I challenge them. Is there any new data out there that causes me to fix this? And why do I do that? Because I understand that humans' biggest risk is their own Dunning-Kruger effect. And I came up with this idea 25 years ago. When I left residency, I started to think about, in real life, we don't have any process like M&M conference, which is morbidity and mortality.
Yeah.
I said, so how do you stay up to date? You know, centralized medicine wants to tell you it's continuing medical education, going to meetings. And I realized that was a centralized bullshit story for them to steal money from us. I said, no, I think the best thing is I need to do this myself. I need to have my own M&M conference. And that's where I came up with the idea.
Yeah. Interesting. Right, as of now, like where you stand today, I'll ask it straight up. Do you believe that there is a higher power? Do you believe that there is a God?
I believe there's a source code. It's kind of funny you're asking me about this. 10 years ago, for my members, they asked me the same question you did. So instead of telling them the answer, what I decided to do, I did a webinar that was about an hour and a half long about what I really think about this. And the funny thing is, to this very day, that hasn't changed yet. So I would tell you, go listen to the webinar.
Yeah.
And I will tell you the name of the webinar because it's pretty provocative. It's called, Is God Light? Is Light God?
Okay. All right. I'll have to check that out. I'll give that a listen for sure. So moving on, great story. I appreciate you sharing all that. Obviously, you've seen the video that I did with Andrew Huberman, right? I asked him in front of thousands of people what he thought about, or his takeaway from the podcast that you did with him and Rick.
About that, because Chantal's the one to me.
Yeah.
What'd you think about his answer?
Oh, so I was gonna. So yeah, no, his.
I think everybody wants to hear your answer, not what I thought about.
Yeah. I thought his answer. I mean, he was.
Did it show you who he is?
Oh yeah, he didn't answer it. And look, so I asked him, what was your takeaway, right? And for me, what I heard is he didn't have a takeaway, because everything he said, he already knew. He was saying morning sunlight and evening sunlight, right?
He didn't know. He still to this day doesn't know anything about palm seeding.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No. And but so I just don't understand. Like, I don't understand how you can go away from that 7-hour long podcast and not take anything away from it. Or do you think he did take something away from it, but he doesn't want to share it?
No, I know he took something away from it, but I'm going to tell you what the real issue is. He works at one of the biggest centralized criminal cabals in Stanford University.
Yep.
Now, when I did that 7-hour podcast, you didn't know this. You didn't know what I was going to say to Danny Jones. You didn't know what I was going to say to the Bulwark guys. Now you understand what SRI is. They were part of the MK Ultra program. And I knew this before going in. So I'll tell you, as a young man, do you remember in that story when Rick told Huberman, I asked Jack to do this 6 weeks ago, and he didn't ask me, put me on radio silence. Why did I do it? Chantal goaded me into doing it. Because I knew that if I did it, the next year, 18 months, the story that I've now unleashed on the world about why I'm such a problem for people, you were going to understand. You're going to understand how Becker, how Stanford, how Sergey Brin, how the Wojcicki sisters, how the Mossad, Israel, why science was stolen. If you want to know the truth, people who ask me on podcasts, what is my goal? My goal has always been to demolish centralized science and medicine. Now you know the reason why. Like, no one should ever question me about what my modus operandi is, because I've told you guys for 18 months on every single podcast. And it tells you what a fraud Huberman really was. If you want to know the truth, Rick wanted me to be the teacher and him the student. And I know he learned a lot more than he's willing to admit. what you don't know, my friend, and I think Chantal's told you on your Instagram and your social media, that right at the end of this,
Yeah.
Huberman was lit up like a Christmas tree, like a little boy at Christmas Day, and said, not only am I going to have you on my podcast, but I'm going to come down to your clinic and this and that. And look, you guys can fact check me. Why? Because who was there? Chantal and Rick.
Yeah.
If you want to know who's really disappointed, in my opinion, he'll never say it, but it's Rick, because Rick's friends with Huberman, and he saw Rick was trying to give Huberman a gift. And you know what? This is like Huberman regifting it and giving it to someone else. Why? Because his masters at Stanford are like, no to Jack Kruse, no to decentralized science, no to decentralized medicine, because guess what? We're part of the Rockefeller Rothschild Banking Institute. We're tied to DARPA. You know, we're one of the original schools with ARPANET. No. And remember, you're our bitch. You're our mouthpiece. He's the biggest public relations person for Stanford. He brings more money in. And you want to know what he told me? I guess I can out some of this because I would normally keep this stuff private.
Go for it.
Huberman was thinking about leaving Stanford, and his work wasn't really being funded. And he told me and Rick that, and he goes, he got dissatisfied. That's why he started the podcast. And it turns out because he started the podcast and it started doing successful, that's when he decided to stay. And then Stanford's bigwigs started loving what he was doing because they realized that this was like his podcast for Stanford is like an unending radio commercial on CNBC, for their endowment.
Yeah.
That's the reason why this is a mutually parasitic relationship between Huberman and Stanford, because guess what? This is Upton Sinclair's admonition to all of us. When a man's job is dependent upon his salary, he tends to fucking fall in line. And that's exactly what Huberman's done. So when you asked him that question, and I listened to it, and I heard the answer, and he said, compared it to wrestling and me being a heel, and I'm thinking to myself, because, what he says about me doesn't really bother me. But what really bothered me is that he just lied to his entire audience. He should have told them. Well, yeah, I did say I was going to have him on the podcast, and I was going to come to the clinic. In fact, I had a former first-round NFL player lined up to be the patient that day.
Yeah.
So you want to know who really lost out, my friend? You, the public, you, the audience, because guess what? You guys would have seen some amazing quantum biology behind the scenes. Now he can go fucking suck my cock. Okay? And yeah, do I want to out him and all of his friends? Yeah, I've outed everybody else as part of this program. But remember, he's now MK Ultra 9.0, just like his friend Joe Rogan, just like other friends Tucker Carlson. Like, you guys don't understand. And you're a young man, so I'm going to tell you something. This is your lesson. I told Breedlove this. He was just here for 4 days. You are now the media, dude. And you have a duty to get this right. You want to know the truth? Podcasters who I agree to talk to, you're the oracle that I allow. I don't care what the journal article people say. I don't care what anybody else says. You guys as podcasters have a duty to do right when they do wrong. So the fact you stood up as a young man and did that, I feel like you didn't know what you were stepping into, because now I'm giving you my side of the story. And my side of the story is decidedly different than what he told you. Yeah. And when he said, well, I don't think Jack likes me, actually, that has nothing to do with it. I like Andrew, but I know who Andrew is now. Yeah. And I want the rest of the world to know who he is. So that way, as I told you before, I'm the guy that wants you to question everything. So what you have to do with Andrew is you have to parse out what he says. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because he's all tatted up. Apparently he's a ladies' man. Apparently he's not trustworthy in that part of his life. Andrew still does good stuff. And I'm willing to throw the bad stuff out to see what the juice is behind. He still has a chance. Is he still redeemable? You asked me about, do I believe in God? I guess I must, because if I'm telling you that even someone like Andrew, who's done some pretty fucked up things, is redeemable, he can help people, why did I agree to talk to him to begin with? Because as I said in that podcast, he may be able to help young medical students break away from the bullshit that they've learned at Stanford. And do I know he's been unsuccessful? Yeah, because now I met Callie and Cassie Means.
Yeah.
They went there. But who's the flip side of that? I met Mary Talley Bowden, who also went to Stanford. She is an absolute shining star. So do I know that Stanford, even though it's a really dangerous place for a young mind to go, can you still come out and help people? That's what Mary is. Casey, not for me. She's decided to do kind of what her brother's doing. And I don't trust either one of them. Just like I don't trust Huberman. But again, am I willing to completely throw the mean sibling completely out? No, I'm sure there's something redeemable in their message, but I'm going to hold their feet to the fire. And I promise you, when that Danny Jones podcast comes out, you're going to see what an M&M conference looks like on a podcast. That I promise.
Yeah. Awesome. Quickly going back to Andrew Huberman, then we can switch topics here. I mean, you kind of like said it, but I kind of wanted to ask the question to you. What was your takeaway from that podcast? And also, like, there was no video of this podcast, right? So I wanted to see, like, what was that dynamic?
Rick did film it, but he didn't release it. Rick is talking about making a movie with me, so I got a funny feeling that might be in a movie somewhere.
Oh, yeah, we need to see that. Because I wanted to know, like, what the dynamic, because obviously we can hear your guys' voices, but seeing it, you would be able to see, like, what the dynamic in that room was.
I mean, his face the whole time when I was saying things, like, when I said things, you could see it was him getting punched in the face. My favorite part of the podcast, and I've said this, is when he talked about Nicholas Burleson. He goes, yeah, my friend told us about this amphibian blue light detector. And he goes, we thought he was crazy and this and that. And he goes, why would this be the most dominant, blue light detector in the human brain? And I'm looking at Huberman, and I mean, you see my face. I'm like, bro, don't say what you're about to say. And he says it. And basically, if you're a scientist, right then and there, you know what a fraud Huberman is. Why? Because everybody who knows anything about evolutionary history makes total sense why we'd have amphibians were present before mammals. In fact, that's where we evolved from. So, hello. And, this is the point. Not only is it fraudulent, but it also tells you the difference between centralized and decentralized science. Like, I represent decentralized science, and decentralized science always says verify, don't trust. Centralized science is exactly the opposite. Andrew's bought the hook, line, and sinker that, he's learned from his training. And it turns out most of his friends at Stanford are the same way. So you guys, as the podcasters, need to realize, don't be impressed by fucking titles, okay? Be impressed if they're using decentralization in their thinking. And what do you do then? That's when you challenge, the status quo. That's when you can't tolerate censorship. You have to have personal sovereignty, in how you conduct your life and also how you conduct the science in your life, so that you can be an effective teacher for the masses. And, I even mentioned to Rick and Huberman at that time that if you parse out the background, the origin of the word surgeon, it means to teach in Latin. And I told him, I said, I'm here to teach you. I know you don't know what I know. And I know that you don't even know 1% of what's in my head. And to me, I said, your duty, if you hear something here that you like, you need to start teaching medical students to do the same thing. Why? Because I promise you, anybody who listens to that podcast who has a medical degree, if you are open-minded, this will send you down a huge rabbit hole. And it made me happy because what Rick tried to do to stimulate Huberman, which didn't happen, all of a sudden, who falls in my lap? Dr. Alexis Cowan. Alexis Cowan, who trains, and you want to know the truth, she's probably the better choice than Huberman, and I'll tell you why. You probably know better than anybody else as a young guy that I hate food gurus. Why? Because they're more centralized than anybody. Well, here she comes, trains in biochemistry at the best metabolic lab in the world, the Rabinowitz lab. These are the same guys that actually told David Sinclair, you're a lying fuck about, NAD supplements. And to me, to have a PhD researcher of her ilk and then her to go, wait a minute, everything we believe, we need to study it with different light, different water, because everything we've done is wrong. Like when I said to Huberman and Rick that 99% of everything in the textbook is wrong, Alexis understood that implicitly. She goes, yeah, because I know how we did, our experiments. Like when she was here with me for my member event 2 weeks ago, she actually relayed a really interesting story about when she was working with nocturnal animals and they did the studies. If people put the blue lights on when they had to go do the studies at nighttime, all the studies were different. So what did Rabinowitz do? He put red lights in the lab, and then Alexis, to her credit, she goes, you know how crazy this was, Jack? She goes, we did it right then. Then what did we do? We ran to the lab to write our stuff down. We put blue lights on it with us. Yeah. We somehow thought we were different than the animals we were studying. And I just chuckled when I heard it, because the fact that she said that, she realized how incongruent science in the nutrition world and science in the biochemistry world really are. And to her credit, she's not stopped since that podcast. So here's the cool thing. You've heard me say many times, when I do a podcast, I know I'm always speaking to one person. Sometimes I don't know who that person is. Sometimes they manifest, later. And right now I would say probably you and Alexis probably were the two people who have at least resonated back to me like, dude, I got something from this.
Yeah. I love it. Yeah, I mean, I'm currently in college right now, and obviously everything I get taught, I question. My whole motto is question everything. It's in my Instagram bio. I say it all the time. I think it's the best thing we do, and I think it's the best thing we need to be doing, and people aren't questioning anything, really.
Make sure when this interview goes live, you also send it to Huberman, because you know what?
Yeah.
This is the message that I try to get to him. Here you are in college before medical school, and even though he played a small part in it, it looks like that podcast had an effect on you. And to me, that's good.
For sure. I mean, look, I looked up to Huberman when I got into the whole science thing. And this was like sophomore year of high school is when I really started loving like science and my science classes. And I was always into health. So I was raised in a holistic household. And Huberman resonated with me because he was having these like actionable steps, right, for health, right? And I looked up to him, right? And then I listened to this podcast. I learned about you, and I'm like, all right, there's something to this, right? And then I dove deep into the science, and it's there, right? And people need to start questioning stuff. And look, it's working, right? I'm reaching a lot of my friends, and it's great, right? I wear my.
That means that Chantal was right, that I should have went and had the talk with Rick and Andrew.
Yeah.
Instead of me having a bad taste in my mouth from Andrew, maybe, and I think maybe Rick is going to like hearing this podcast too, because Rick's goal, you are a product of what Rick really wanted to happen.
Yeah. No, for sure. I mean, it's impacted me, and I know I need to listen to that podcast back over and over again. There's so much information there. It's amazing. But yeah, no, great. I thank you for saying all of that. I want to go a little bit into the light story, and obviously people can go to other podcasts and hear all the in-depth stuff. I have a couple like unique questions that I want to hear your thoughts on. And so first off, you said on one podcast before, you asked the question to someone, how many sunrises have you seen in your life, right? And so this morning, my friends here from college, we went to see the sunrise this morning, and I asked him the exact same question. I was like, how many sunrises have you seen in your life? And he's like, I don't know, maybe like 10, right? He's 18 years old. And I'm like, well, no, like you should be seeing the sunrise every single day, right? He actually said,
is to tell those guys, this is the reason why. I'm going to tell you another funny story that I think will resonate.
Yeah.
So this guy on Twitter, his handle is Henrik, and I think it's at HTW. He's a big science poster. He blocked me. But about 10 years ago, before any of the papers were written, I said, if you don't see the sunrise, you cannot properly utilize the TCA cycle. In other words, you can't burn fat, can't use beta oxidation. And this guy always would argue with me because he's a classic food guru. 2021, the paper gets written and he posts, I can't believe that Kruse was right about this, but here's the paper that shows it. So
Did he unblock you?
No, he still has me blocked to this very day. You know, confirmation of bias is a hard thing to overcome. But the thing that I want you guys to understand, that the reason you need to watch the sunrise is because I want you to have full utilization of the energy that's power, you know, the transforming of energy from the sun, from food. Because if you don't have that, if you eat a carnivore diet, it's almost like trying to have sex with a soft dick. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And what I'm trying to do is teach you guys to be savages. Why? Because when you get to be my age, I'm hoping that you impact millions of kids that are 18 and 19 years old, because they're not going to get told this. Like,
no,
I told you about Peter Setlow. He never taught me what I just said to you. But you know what he did do? He taught me to challenge the status quo.
Yeah.
To go find out what it is that we use to select between all these crazy pathways they teach us about. And it turns out the answer is light.
Yeah, for sure. So one of my questions I had, Dr. Arturo Herrera, the guy who's doing the whole human photosynthesis stuff, down in Mexico, I got his book and I was reading through it. I haven't finished it yet, but first off, I mean, I guess I understand, right? He's Hispanic, so his English is not the best. The book is, you know, there's some typos and stuff. But do you think there's more research that needs to be done with this idea?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
His book is filled with half truths.
Yeah.
But
okay.
guess what? The good stuff in his book, it's worth all the bad.
Yeah.
Now, here's the interesting thing. I'll give you a flip.
Okay.
Gerald Pollack's book, very interesting to read, but I'm really pissed at Pollack because he hasn't done the follow-up that he needs
with
to do.
With deuterium depleted?
Yeah, he not only deuterium, how about UV light? He does a great job talking about infrared light, but I've already told Alexis, I said, we need to do studies with UV with regular water, then UV with deuterium depleted water. And you know what I think we're going to find?
What?
We're going to find coherent domains through our ability to pull out massive amounts of electrons. And why does this tie into our friend from Mexico? Because he rightly poses that melanin allows us to separate more electrons from water.
Yeah.
Chlorophyll does. Well, I got news for you. I think when you have deuterium depleted water and light, based on what I know about physics, the dielectric constant, in every bit of water a mitochondria makes, that means we can harvest trillions of electrons. So it turns out, what's the real energy transformation driver in us? It's light and water. It's not ATP.
Mm-hmm.
And that fits to all the things that Gilbert Ling said in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and why he went after Peter Mitchell and the Nobel Prize that he got in 77. Do I think that sacred cow needs to be taken down? Yeah, because guys like Huberman believe all the lies. Yeah. And then they teach it to young guys like you.
Yeah. Would you go as far as to say that ATP, like we don't even use ATP for energy? Or
no, I think we use it, but we only use probably about a third.
Okay.
And because if you look at Ling's work, Ling figured out that the need for ATP, if we're using it for everything, we can't even physically make enough ATP in a day.
Yeah, the math doesn't add up.
Right. It doesn't add up. And then it breaks the second law of thermodynamics by not a little bit, by 500-fold. Yeah. So that one mathematics equation, that's what we call the stochastics of energy transformation. That thermodynamically should make everybody start to look at other places. And I think Herrera should get credit because he's pointing it out, but he's not doing the work. And to be honest with you, I think Dr. Alexis could win a Nobel Prize because I think she will take a little bit from Ling, from Nick Lane, from Peter Mitchell, from Herrera, from Pollack, and she will synthesize all the things that they missed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when you do that, then I think that's when humanity can take that quantum leap, because then I personally think when you realize that, that's actually going to be another thing that disintermediates the control of the Rockefellers and Big Pharma over centralized medicine. And then obviously we need to get rid of all the Maxwell family who controls all the oracles and journals. I mean, this whole thing, when you really see it for what it is, this whole thing is just a giant sham of business and profiteers that are designed to keep us away from the truth. That's really what's going on. And this is why, I fundamentally have a problem with anybody who's like Casey Means, Callie Means, Huberman, even Jerry Pollack. I put Pollack in there because, he always cries, well, I need more money to do it. Dude, how much money do you need to go to Petco and buy a UV bulb and get some deuterium depleted water and use it with Nafion? I mean, give me a break. And every time he says that on a podcast, I want to reach into the podcast and strangle him because that is so disingenuous, but it's exactly what a centralized scientist does. They beg for money and then they don't do what they need to do.
Yeah. You mentioned Dr. Alexis Cowan there. Do you have any updates on her lab if that's coming to fruition?
You'd have to get her on. I mean,
Yeah.
she was here.
But she is coming on. She is coming on.
All I can tell you is that when she was here 2 weeks ago, I introduced her directly to Nicole Shanahan. We all had lunch together.
Awesome. Yeah. If that lab becomes a reality, that would be amazing.
Well, what you should do is send this podcast to Nicole and Alexis when you see it, and make sure you put timestamps on and say,
yeah,
talk to me about this, Goose.
Yes. And look, if Alexis is hearing this, I would love to work in that lab one day once that becomes a reality.
Well, the way you do that is tag her on this and say, I mean, she's going to know who you are.
Yeah, we've been messaging each other.
Yeah. So I'm going to tell you, I think that this is good. And remember what I said to you, that we need people like you and Alexis to do the work of the people in science, to get it out there where there's no oracle problem. And Nicole is a person that's behind this, because right now, to be honest with you, not only is she rich and famous and now tied in politics, but also remember, she's a patient that we need to help. She took a whole bunch of jabs, and the jabs have led to nasty complications for her. So let me just tell you something. Not only do we have a duty to help her, but we need to explain to her, let's use the money that you've been wasting on the DNC and bullshit science, and let's study the things that actually are going to fix you and your child. I'm 100% behind that.
Yeah. And I think something that just popped in my mind when you talked about the jabs. So I've never gotten vaccinated in my entire life. Never had an antibiotic, none of that. And I think that, along with all the light, I mean, that's what allows me to question everything, right? I mean, people, they're just like
wise. That's a very wise statement, because guess what?
I mean, people are controlled not to question.
Correct. Yeah. But that's actually what the Rockefeller Big Pharma Foundation is all about. It's about taking our ability to transform energy so that we're more controllable. That's really what they found in MK Ultra. So anything they can do to sequentially poison the wells of humanity, the answer is they're going to continue to do it.
Yeah. Amazing. All right. So we talked about light. We talked about water. I have one quick question about magnetism. Do you know who William Philpott is or was? You do? Okay. I want to hear, what are your thoughts on the work that he did?
I think it's really good, but again, almost like Herrera, I think it needs to go further. I look at it like this. These are ideas that are like in infancy. I look at everything in quantum biology, light, water, magnetism. It's all in infancy. Like, in fact, Robert Breedlove was just here, and he wanted to have this big discussion about light. And I explained to him that light has all the energy and information of the universe buried in it. The problem is you have to extract it. Turns out magnetism is one of the ways to do it. And, the crazy secret sauce was hidden in Maxwell's equations. And I told him the story about Oliver Heaviside. Most people don't know the history. This is why I've been on this big kick about teaching you about history. Because what I usually say is, if you have to either trust the government or know your history. Well, it turns out in science, it's the same way. You have to trust your science teacher or know the history of science to know why there's a problem. Yeah. So there's a reason
they don't teach us the history of science.
No. So when Maxwell did everything, he actually found 22 equations for electromagnetism. And it was shrunk down to 4. So it turns out a guy in the 30s comes up with an idea about a magnetic monopole, and his name's Paul Dirac. And Dirac said, look, I think that the mathematics clearly says that a magnetic monopole is interesting. Whose science is this tied to? It actually ties to Tesla. And, unending source of 0-point energy. Again, this has been buried. And the reason it's buried is because I think we shrunk from 22 to 4. equations. And I think Dirac was the one guy in the 30s that said it. And then I don't know if you listen to A16Z Andreessen, Mark Andreessen just said literally a couple days ago that when he was talking to the government, the Biden administration, about AI, that he says, look, we're going to do the same thing we did with physics. We stopped physics by removing, information in the 1950s after the war. So what are they basically telling us? That there's a way for them to centralize just about any process. And what do? They use censorship by removing some of the key points. And scientists need to understand this process. So people like Pollack, Philpott, Nick Lane, you continue to ask those questions, because guess what? You will generate data. And instead of just publishing it because they can censor it there, you come on a podcast like this and tell the world. Now, they may pull it from YouTube, but then you put it on Rumble or you put it directly on X.
Yeah.
And you let the people hear what you have to say. Why? Because you shouldn't be afraid of telling people what the data shows, because that's actually how we really improve science, but it's also how we slay sacred cows.
Yeah.
It's how we get rid of cholesterol nonsense. It's how we get rid of, SSRIs. It's how we get rid of psychiatry. It's also how we get rid of pediatricians who think it's wise to inject kids with vaccines. The only way we do that is we have to have a process built into the system to challenge the status quo. And that, to me, is the real key about decentralizing science and medicine. I'm trying to actually help build that. I feel like I'm the guy with this big Rockefeller, big pharma boulder. And I know that if my lever's big enough, like Archimedes said, I can get that boulder to move.
Yeah. Amazing. I agree 100%. To sort of end all this off, I asked my audience on Instagram what questions they had for you, and I got some cool responses. So I want to shoot some of these to you. First, starting off with, so Dr. Alexis Cowan responded. She asked two different questions. First, she said, ask you to talk about the Fabians. I have no clue what this even is. What's your response to that? I don't know.
Right. So the Fabians are basically British people who were loyal to the crown. And where their story starts is 1840s, 1850s. They were first based in a place called Saxe Coburn Gotha. And in the influential people there, most of them turned out to be Jewish merchants. They were ostracized within the Royal Empire. So they got the idea to leave this part of Germany and go to the United States. They go to the United States. They're still loyal to the people that made fun of them, specifically Queen Victoria. For those of you who don't know, Queen Victoria ruled from 1837 to 1901. And the Fabians try to get back in good graces with the royal family. So they were the original traders to the American colony. Why? Because if you think about it, you just lost a loyal title to America 50 years before that. So what did they do? They fomented the discrepancies between the South and the North. They're the ones that actually, how shall I say, helped foster the American Revolutionary War, the Civil War. And then they were very, very important in actually killing Abraham Lincoln. And those people eventually morphed into, the turn of the century, when Queen Victoria was gone, they became very influential in American politics. In fact, two of them, John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles, were very important in crafting the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles was designed to draw us back into a world war, to give the loyalists another chance to recapture America and Russia. And who is the president that allowed these traitors to do this? That was Woodrow Wilson, the single worst president in United States history. And he knew it. Why? Because during his reign, that's where we got the IRS. It's also where we got the Federal Reserve. And it's also where we got the 17th Amendment. These are the three worst decisions that an American president's ever done. And if you want to know that most of the problems that we have in the world today are tied to the Fabians, to the story of the Fabians, and how they've infiltrated the American government. They are the true ancestors of General Groves.
Awesome. I'm sure people can take that and learn a bunch just from looking up everything you just said there.
All they have to do is go on my website because the whole story
Yeah.
is there on the forums.
Yeah. Oh, great. And I'll do that as well. Another question from Dr. Cowan. She asked, what is your take on the drones?
Yeah, the drones are part of a PSYOP. The PSYOP is to make you look at the left hand so you don't see what the right hand's doing. I also think the drones have a lot to do with the people in government that are getting ready to lose some power. I also think the blinking lights at the Asheville airport and in Walmarts all over the country, this is them showing you that they can weaponize LED lights. So eventually, those lights will be tunable to do things to you. And how do you make something tunable? They have to get the tech in you. They're going to do that from jabs. They're going to do it from food. They're going to do it from the air you breathe, from geoengineering. And you as a patriot need to fight at every last effort. Anybody who's tied to the industrial military complex, the Fabians, because they're one and the same. These are synonyms now. You need to push back hard on them.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know if you saw this, but just come to mind real quick, did you see that satellite that now this company owns that can shine light onto a specific area on Earth at night?
Yeah.
Crazy.
That's not crazy. You just need to understand that, it's kind of like you were very interested in the story that I gave Rick and Huberman. So I want you to think about this. You don't realize that what you just asked me about that satellite, that is a fractal of exactly what mitochondria do to POMC inside you. So they're using this at global scale now to affect things on the Earth, the tectonic plates that they want to control. And when you begin to think about it like this, you begin to realize that really kinetic wars are going away, but this is what we need to start thinking about. Yeah. You want to know really what is behind Elon Musk. You want to know behind his SpaceX. You want to know what's tied to Space Force. Right now, all of you think this is utopia because you see the good. Just like Steve Jobs thought all of his stuff was utopia until he had to have a Whipple. I'm sure Randy Moss feels the same way, that he did everything great in his Hall of Fame career, but now he took a jab because Disney forced him to get it. He has the same problem that Steve Jobs has. He's going to probably be dead in a year. So remember, the utopia part of the story is look at my left hand so you don't see the right hand.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's how they can control what we think. Yeah. So one other question. So someone asked, we know that light at night is not good for us. What about the moon? And I think I know the answer, but what about the moonlight? What do you think about that?
Moonlight is technically right now not good for you, but it is in a way. The moon is actually how many animals control sexual fertility. So, for example, the best known source is through corals. That's when they usually fertilize through the light because it stimulates the release. And sea turtles do the same thing when they come up on beaches and when they don't come up on beaches. This is the reason why if you go to Mexico, to Acamal, you'll see that they tell you can't have any light anywhere around the beaches for the same reason. Now, there used to be something with human females where they were also sensitive to light with their estrous cycles. In fact, if you got a bunch of women together, they would all start having their period at the same time. What people don't realize is that women release biophotons and they give the signal off to each other. So, yes, the moon does play a role. The moon today, unfortunately, acts like non-native EMF. Why? Because we have so much light pollution around us that the light from the moon is no longer, how shall we say, a good fidelity signal.
Interesting. This
is why humans don't use estrus anymore, because they're light polluted.
Yeah. Gotcha. Awesome. Another question. This was interesting. Someone asked, why do platypuses glow under UV light?
Well, it should be simple, because the chromophores they use don't absorb. And do you know the story of evolution? KT event, what animals got through? the flying dinosaurs called theropod dinosaurs, and then mammals. And it turned out it's mammals that absorb the light. What's the other mammal that got through? This one. You know what's the most amazing two animals that get through that don't fit the narrative that I laid out to Huberman? It's actually bats, because they're the only mammal that can fly, and they're nocturnal. And it turns out the duck-billed platypus is the only mammal that still lays eggs.
Oh, okay.
That's from a previous engagement before we had placental. What does eutherian mean? It means that we're placental animals. The duck-laying platypus isn't. So that is the reason why they're not using the same light. And do I believe that the duck-billed platypus has a lesson for us about what the problem with dinosaurs were, prior to this event? The answer is yes.
Yeah. Awesome. Let's see. So, another question. And I'm curious about your take on this also. Hyperbaric oxygen therapy, right? In these oxygen chambers. Is that something that you would suggest someone to use, prescribe someone to use? No,
it's just like methylene blue. The reason why? What's a terminal electron acceptor for mitochondria? Oxygen. So if you give somebody, let's use a simple idea. Let's use somebody with CPAP, somebody who's got sleep apnea.
Yeah.
When you understand that your colony of mitochondria from Doug Wallace's work can go from really, really healthy to really, really bad, that name is heteroplasmy. Do you think it's a good idea to take a bunch of sick engines and throw a ton of oxygen at it? The answer is no, because what does it do? It creates nothing but magnetic chemicals called free radicals. So guess what? Those free radicals then sculpt tissues differently. Do we have proof that Uncle Jack may be right about this? Ask any ICU doctor what happens when you give people high FiO2s through an endotracheal tube. They get a disease called ARDS. In fact, that's how Tony Fauci created an algorithm for us to kill a lot of people in COVID in hospitals.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And that's what ARDS is. So when somebody has high heteroplasmy and some idiot in functional medicine or allopathic medicine say it's a good idea to use hyperbaric oxygen, realize it's not. Same thing is true with ozone. The doctor who's prescribing it needs to understand these relationships, because it turns out the stochastic chemistry of how much oxygen we need is linked to the heteroplasmy rate in there. And when you put too much oxygen in it, what are you doing? You change the light signal that comes out of the mitochondria. And that creates free radicals.
Yeah. What about ozone for dentistry? No.
You still don't. We don't have the things that we need. Like the things that I've told Alexis that we need to craft. We need to craft an optical scanner like the food guys use to see if food is organic or not. But we also need photomultipliers to put inside. Like, for example, I can tell you the test that I would think as a former oral surgeon, if I took a third molar out, what I'd like to do, this would be an IRB. I would like to put an optical scanner in the tooth socket and sew it in and leave it in for the 14 days and see what the light signal was as it healed. Then I would like to do the same thing, put the optical scanner inside the periodontal pocket of another tooth on the other side that hasn't been extracted, and then extrapolate the two. And then I'd like to do studies on the same person to see, okay, what's their redox measures? And I believe that we're going to find for every single person it's different. And the key part of this metric is to figure out that people who have different redox need different frequencies, need different amounts of oxygen, need different amounts of ozone. And then we would know, okay, this person we can give this treatment to, and we're safe, and we're supporting the DC electric current that Becker talks about for regeneration. But in this person, if we give them hyperbaric oxygen, we're going to hurt them. What's the best treatment for hyperbaric oxygen that anybody can do without a prescription? Doing what I'm doing right now, being the UV light, because what does it do? It stimulates oxygenation in us. Why? That's Herrera's work, right? You charge separate water, you make hydrogen and oxygen.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why when you're in UV light, you have high venous O2. It's the only thing that increases oxygenation on the venous side of the circulatory system.
Wow. Yeah. No, that's a great point. I didn't even think about that. A personal question, talking about what we were just referencing. So I have 4 wisdom teeth, right, that are coming in. Bottom ones are like pretty much already out, coming in sideways, right? With the current technology that we have right now, what would you suggest? And keeping in mind, like, I don't want to get them pulled out, but
Yeah,
I'm
leave
here.
them alone. As long as you don't get
Yeah.
chronic pericornitis from that, you don't have to get them out. I had 3 of mine taken out. I still have 1 left.
Mm.
It doesn't make any sense to me to take a tooth out that doesn't need to be taken out. Generally, you get pericornitis. That's when the gingiva stays on the top of the tooth and it gets inflamed, from biting down on it. But we have techniques now. You can use Paradex, which is oral chlorhexidine. Not that I'm a big fan of drugs, but you swish with that and you have pericornitis, you can get rid of it. You can also use USP grade hydrogen peroxide to do that. That will actually take care of it. But no, I don't think you should have teeth taken out if you don't need them out. The reason that teeth are being taken out now is a totally different story. That's malocclusion is due to all the light pollution that we have. Like the classic class 2 malocclusion you see in the royal family, where they have small lower jaws and big uppers, or the class 3, which is Jay Leno's face, which looks like dish face. That's from hypoplasia of the maxilla. These are all tied to EMF abuses that we've had the last 5,000 years. And how do we know this? This is the cool part of decentralized science. How do you learn this? When I was a young boy, I got to see King Tut's exhibit in the Museum of Natural History. And I noticed that every person that was elite and royal had the same diseases that we had. And it turns out, when I became in dental school, there was a very interesting thing where they found all the Anubians that built the pyramids. Their skeletons were buried right next to the Sphinx and the Pyramid Gizas. All those heads went out and they sent them to a guy named Peter Unger. Peter Unger found out that they had perfect dentitions, every single one of them. Why? Because they didn't live inside in temples with light. Light was the artificial light then. It was fire. But these guys didn't do that. They lived under the stars at night and they had perfect skulls. So realize that this hack is from 5,000 to 2,000 years ago. So that means if humans get this message, can we go back to that? Yeah, and remember, I think there's a correlate or a bad collateral effect from removing teeth from people. I do. I've not really talked about that too much, but I'm a big believer in trying to save teeth if we can.
Yeah, awesome. Me too. It's good to hear that, because I don't want to get them pulled out, and I don't think I will. That's the plan as of now. Last thing, I know we're running low on time. We're getting there. Is last question. Someone asked, can we buy your floor plan to your house?
I'm assuming you could.
Yeah, it's an awesome house, by the way. The whole thing's grounded, right? Amazing.
I'm sitting right now on a teak deck that's grounded directly to the side of a volcano.
Amazing. That's the dream. That's the dream one day.
Well, you don't have to dream about it. All you have to do is buy Bitcoin. There we
go. Yeah. Well, actually, all right. This is the last question, because someone had a question about this. Who was their question was, who was Nakatomo?
Len Sassman.
Yes. Oh, okay. Interesting.
And when Bleed Love's podcast comes out,
yeah,
we do a whole day session on why I think that's the case. So you'll be able to hear it.
There we go. Perfect. Awesome. Jack, this was amazing. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it. What you have to say is amazing, and people need to. I'm glad, because a lot of my audience, I did a poll. They don't know who you are. So this is great. They'll know who you are now.
That's a good thing, the way I look at it. Because if they did know who I was, that means I'd probably be a centralized cuck.
Yeah. So thank you so much again. And I appreciate your time.
All right, no problem.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you for joining me in my conversation with Dr. Jack Kruse. As mentioned in the introduction, Jack has been on hundreds of other podcasts where he has outlined all the science behind his perspectives on health. Some of these podcasts I have listed in the show notes. I encourage you all to go give them a listen too. Stay tuned for future episodes where we'll continue to bring you insightful conversations with others like Jack. Until then, keep questioning, stay curious, and take steps towards a healthier life. Thank you for listening.